Welcome to Session 2 of SSLS 744, Special Education Technology. Due to the inclement weather tonight, we will be conducting the session online rather than face-to-face. So what I'd like to do briefly is share with you a small piece of the lecture that you would have heard tonight in class. This will assist you in not only making some connections with the two articles you read, O'Day and Eddyburn, but also prepare you for the session activity, which will be related to the technology tool we would have used tonight. So what we want to take a look at is how do we define access, and particularly through the least restrictive environment. Then we'll take a close look at policies affecting that access and how technology is related. And finally, how can technology create some curriculum enhancements that will further provide students with access. When we talk about defining access to students with disabilities, it's very critical that we look at this with a broad stroke. In this course, we're primarily focused on the use of technology in special education, but that technology is related to how we provide students with access. Therefore, it's very critical that we have a foundation of understanding of what access looks like and the legislation that drives that access. When we look at providing students with disabilities access, we look at it on three fronts. First, does the student have access to the general curriculum? Second, is the student with a disability involved in the general curriculum? And third, is the student with disability making progress in that general curriculum? Each of these items, as you know, is addressed in the individual education plan. We must first prove that students have access to the general curriculum, but we must also show that access is not only the student sitting in the classroom, but that they are involved in learning that curriculum and that we have measurable goals and we're tracking that progress to show that students are learning. This access is primarily related to the least restrictive environment. And there's a least restrictive environment test that courts have often used to dictate whether schools have provided students with the appropriate environment. These are the questions they look at, and let's consider this. First, can education in the regular classroom with the use of supplementary aids and services be achieved satisfactorily for a particular student? Okay, and we look at that in three ways. Has the school taken sufficient steps to accommodate the student in the regular classroom with the use of supplementary aids, services, and modifications? Okay, so we know in the IEP that we address how the student accesses the regular classroom, and in doing that, how do we use aids, services, and modifications to assist the student? Okay, that's the first thing we look at. Second, will the student receive educational benefit from the regular education classroom? Okay, so we next have to make sure, is this student going to receive a benefit from being in the regular education classroom? It's important to remember that most students will. Third, what will the effect of the student's presence in the regular classroom on the education of the other students be? So finally, we have to consider if this student's behavior or academic progress affects the other students in the classroom in any way. Okay? If it does, that doesn't necessarily mean that classroom is not the appropriate place for the student, but we have to look at then, are there aids, services, and modifications we can make that would reduce that effect and therefore allow the student to be successful and the other students in the classroom to be successful? Okay? We have to weigh those effects. Finally, if the student is to be removed from the regular ed classroom and placed in a more restrictive setting, has that student been mainstreamed to the maximum extent appropriate? So basically what this question is saying is, if the IEP team determines that the regular education classroom is not appropriate for one of those reasons that we discussed above, whether that student is going to have an effect on the other students in the classroom negatively, if the student won't receive an educational benefit from the regular ed classroom, or if the steps that have been taken, the aid, services, and modifications, still do not allow the student to perform in the regular ed classroom. Okay? Have we done all of those things to make sure that the student has been mainstreamed